Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Hey, Caroline, how are you today?
I'm doing well, Bryce. I sound a little rough. I'm not my usual self, my usual voice, but this is the voice I have today.
That's okay. I mean, I think if we go back through all the episodes we've done, I know for a fact there's some episodes where I wish I remembered which ones they were, because it would be funny to go back and listen to them. I know that for a fact there's some episodes where I've been battling a head cold or something, and I sound totally congested and not like myself, but that's okay though, because and you know what, maybe too, that's probably a good thing today, because today's topic, it's one that very similar to our Doctor Who episode. It's one where if it was just me and you on the show today, the episode would probably be like 3 minutes long.
Yes.
But we'd be like, did you watch Dune? You'd be like, no, I didn't get a chance to. You'd be like, did you watch it? I'd be like, yeah, I thought it was pretty good. And you'd be like, all right, that's our episode this week. But luckily, we have a guest joining us today, because, and it just makes sense, by the way, I should start too. It just makes sense for us to be chatting about Dune, us being, of course, a library podcast. And of course, we also have the big new movie, Dune Part 2, is coming out next week. And especially for libraries, it's such a groundbreaking sci-fi book series. Everybody's talking about the movie, and it just makes sense for us to be chatting about this. And we've got an awesome guest joining us today. When the idea of us having a Dune episode came up, Caroline, you were approached by one of your coworkers, and they're like, I must be on this episode.
Yes, and I said, thank goodness, because if you didn't come forward, we would not have done it. So I'm really excited that that happened, and we have the perfect guest for this episode.
Yes, we want to welcome to the show for the very first time. We love having first-time guests. She's a library assistant at our White Mud Crossing branch, the same one you're at, Caroline. And we want to welcome to the show Suzie Hess. Suzie, welcome to Overdue Finds. How are you today?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. But I would also like to state that this episode should be called Overdune Finds, because I'm a huge Dune fan, and I could go on for hours about this. Literally hours. I could talk about Dune.
I like that. That might actually help with our Google search results, maybe. Just, one episode, just start calling it Overdune Finds. I like it. And who knows, even too with the podcast landscape the way it is, just with everybody having their own show, I would not be shocked if there is a Dune podcast out there called Overdune Finds. So, so we're so happy that you're able to join us today. And especially for, if you're listening to this and you're like Caroline and myself, and maybe you've just watched the 2021 movie, and maybe you want to learn more about kind of the differences between the book series and the movies and just the whole history of the franchise, I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. I also want to mention too, before we get into our Overdue Finds picks, Caroline and I talk a lot about on the show, depending on who we have on. We've got such an awesome team of people here at EPL who help put all these episodes together. Caroline, you refer to them as the Overdue Finds family, don't you?
Yes, because that's definitely what it feels like. It takes a lot of people. I was going to say it takes a lot of people to make me sound this good, but maybe not this week. But trust me, they work harder than that.
Yeah, so we want to give a special shout out to one of our Overdue Finds family members who, when you hear this, just wrapped up her time here at EPL, Camila Fida. She's been on, I don't know how many episodes she's been on. She's been on a lot of episodes. I know she was last on maybe our Godfather no, it was our Elvis episode. It was probably the last one she was on. And she was also on our Godfather one. She's edited countless episodes and given us even more great ideas for the podcast. So yeah, we just want to give a special thank you, shout out to Camila Fida, and we're definitely going to miss having her on the show and all of her hard work behind the scenes. All right, so let's get into our Overdue Finds picks here. Suzie, first time on the show. What have you been enjoying lately?
Everything kaiju, Godzilla, and more Godzilla. So right now, I am currently reading the Godzilla, the official guide to the King of Monsters, which is wonderful. It goes through all of the Toho era, and as well the American era of Godzilla. That is another podcast altogether if I start getting into the nuances of the King of Monsters. But it's so good. The texture of the book is so tactile. It's gorgeous. And it has so much information about the different eras. Because if you don't know much about Godzilla, there are many different eras of Godzilla. Plus, the Godzilla -1 had recently come out. We were lucky enough to get minus color as well, and that was quite the experience.
That's awesome. I had a chance to watch Godzilla -1. I didn't know that there was a minus color one. Where did you see that?
That was playing at Cineplex Odeon South Common, and it was only there for like a week.
Oh, okay. That's where I saw it, but I just saw the color version, which was great, by the way. And if you get a chance, please go check it out. I think it's still playing maybe in some theaters, but we'll obviously have it in our collection here shortly if you're not able to put a hold on it yet. But yeah, I'm mostly familiar with the American versions. I don't think I've ever watched an actual one of the Toho films, but it's something I want to kind of get into anyway. I do have to ask though, you kind of sounded like maybe you weren't the biggest fan of the American ones.
So I love the creature design. The creature design of the American Godzillas is really good. Legacy of Monsters, which is currently on Apple, is amazing. I didn't know that I needed Kurt Russell in a Godzilla thing until Kurt Russell was in a Godzilla thing, and it's been delightful. The creature design has always been great. I love the 1998 creature design. However, the whole origin of Godzilla is very much about nuclear war. And the American versions never really touched on that or never really made Godzilla their own. So it felt really flat, and the original Godzillas are absolute masterpieces. I mean, of course, there's the B-movie versions. There was the Millennium version where Toho jumped on the whole bandwagon of doing really, really silly, purposeful B-movies with Godzilla, which were delightful. Now, since Shin Godzilla, Toho has kind of gone back to the original Gojira, where it is talking about some big issues. And we're dealing with this in a way that is much like horror movies. Nice.
Well, apparently, Caroline, we need to do a Godzilla episode. So once I think we have -1 in our collection, Suzie, you might have to come back and join us up for that one.
100%.
It sounds like you know your Godzilla, so that's awesome. You'll be our official Overdue Finds Godzilla expert. Caroline, how about you? What have you been enjoying lately?
Well, speaking of 1998, I recently watched The Faculty, which is a very self-aware sci-fi horror movie that came out that year. You might remember it from its cast. It had Elijah Wood, Josh Hartnett, Clea Duvall, Jordana Brewster, Robert Patrick is in it, Jon Stewart in his movie actor phase of his career. It's a high school set kind of invasion of the body snatchers horror movie about this small town that gets taken over by these alien creatures who are extremely dehydrated. Honestly, watching the movie just made me want to just gulp water like nobody's business. But the movie was directed by Robert Rodriguez, written by Kevin Williamson, and kind of came out in that late 90s period where there were a bunch of teen movies, the kind of post-Scream period, where what Scream had done for kind of that self-aware meta horror slasher movie. You can see that happening in this sci-fi world for the faculty, where they're figuring out how to get away from these alien creatures based on their knowledge of the alien horror or sci-fi movies of the 50s and 60s. So definitely worth checking out. I streamed it on Hoopla. And if you want to go back to 1998, this movie just rockets you there right away. I think the opening credits are over The Offspring. Josh Hartnett never wears less than 3 shirts at a time, long sleeve, short sleeve, all of that. So yeah, it's Selma Hayek is in it. Just the cast is wild. Not everything holds up. I'm not here to defend the faculty, but as a time capsule movie that has kind of got a cult following since its release, definitely worth checking out.
Nice. That's a movie I don't think I know for a fact that I saw it in the theater, but I haven't really watched it since it came out. So yeah, that's definitely one I wouldn't mind checking out again.
What have you been enjoying, Bryce?
Yeah, so I have a book pick this week. And hey, speaking of 1998, the timeline of my book kind of lines up kind of perfectly with my pick here. So if you listen to this podcast on a regular basis, you know that I'm a fan of the 80s and 90s action movies. So my pick this week is actually a book called The Last Action Heroes, The Triumphs, Flops, and Feuds of Hollywood's Kings of Carnage by Nick DeSemlian. He actually wrote a book a few years ago called, I think it's called Wild Crazy Guys or something like that. But basically it's about Hollywood comedies from the 1980s and covers like stuff like Caddyshack and Eddie Murphy and all of those giant stars. But this one, obviously, we're talking about action movies, and it takes a look at the behind the scenes account of the rise of the 80s action stars, thanks to larger than life people like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, and Chuck Norris. You get some great stories about out of control egos. There's a great story near the beginning of the book about how Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone were at the same event, and this big producer was going to bring them out, and there was arguments about who should come out first and how they have to introduce them at the same time. It's crazy. And then we also learn about, in the 90s, of course, the rise of other stars, like a couple of my favorites as a teenager, Jean-Claude Van Damme and Steven Seagal. And then kind of leading to the late 90s, we get the downfall of kind of these over-the-top action stars. Yeah, if you're a big fan of kind of behind-the-scenes look at Hollywood movies and just out-of-control egos, and let's face it, who doesn't love a good story about out of control egos? This book's for you. So I couldn't put it down. I absolutely loved it. All right. So let's get to why we're here today. Of course, we're talking all about Dune, and Caroline, normally you do this, but you've kind of assigned this to me, so I take this very seriously here this week. So I do have some fun facts about Dune that I'll share for those of you who maybe aren't as familiar with the series. But yeah, Dune is an epic sci-fi novel from author Frank Herbert and was originally released as 2 separate serials starting in 1963 before both parts were published together in 1965. So Dune itself is set in the year 10,191 and is about a young man named Paul Atreides whose family agrees to take control of the planet Arrakis, which is essentially a large desert. Now, what makes this planet so valuable is that it's home to something known as spice, which can extend life and is needed for space navigation, among other things. The story features strong themes of politics and religion as various groups battle for control of the spice. So for the books themselves, there's actually 5 sequels to the novel from Frank Herbert, and following his death, his son Brian continued the series in over a dozen additional novels since 1999. And the novel was first adapted to the big screen in 1984 from director David Lynch, which unfortunately at the time was a little bit of a critical failure and a box office disappointment, but it's gone on to become a cult hit, and we'll talk a little bit more about it here in a moment. In 2021, the latest film adaptation was released from Canadian director Denis Villeneuve to critical and commercial success. The film starred Timothée Chalamet as Paul Atreides and also features Zendaya, Josh Brolin, Jason Momoa, Dave Bautista, and Oscar Isaac, among others. The film was a huge hit. It grossed over $400 million worldwide and was nominated for Best Picture. It ended up winning 6 Oscars, though, mostly in the special effects categories. And I thought this was kind of cool. Since 2009, the names and planets from the Dune novels have been adopted for the real-life names of planes and other features on Saturn's moon Titan. So, lots to take in with Dune there. And Suzie, I've got to start with you because obviously you're a huge Dune fan. I guess how and when did you become such a fan of Dune?
So this happened because of the original artist that was set to do the art design for what is now a documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune, and that was H.R. Giger. If you kind of know the name but don't really remember him, you've probably seen his artwork in a lot of places, most notably the Xenomorphs. So he was instrumental in the creation of the Xenomorphs for all of the Alien films, and I loved his artwork, and I was going through one of his art books and found this thing about Dune, and he had designed the Harkonnen stuff. So I was like, oh, okay, this is really neat. I want to know more about this. And the only thing out at the time was David Lynch's Dune. And at the time, I had known about David Lynch through watching The Elephant Man. And I thought David Lynch was a very ordinary director. I did not yet realize that he was an extraordinary director. Take it as you will, that Dune was very instrumental in pushing the saga forward in all forms of television, movies, and everything else. So there is a huge fan base for the David Lynch one still, but Giger is the absolute reason I tuned in and then read the books at all. If it wasn't for him being involved in the art direction of the defunct Jodorowsky's Dune, I wouldn't have probably picked up the books until much later on. So this was around, 1998, 99. Speaking of 1998, yeah, it was around that time.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually watched Jodorowsky's Dune in preparation for this episode, and it's that's another one too. By the way, we have it in our collection. You can actually stream it through Hoopla as well. But yeah, it takes a look at a movie that they originally tried to make it in, what year was it? I think it was like the mid-70s or something.
Yeah, mid-70s.
Yeah, and it was going to be like this like epic 15-hour long movie starring like Salvador Dali, Orson Welles. I think David Carradine was in it, and the director was going to cast his son as Paul Atreides. It's a wild documentary. It's totally worth checking out.
It really is. It was so interesting to see, and technically they kind of did eventually do something very related to that in a graphic novel with Mobius as the illustrator called The Incal. And we do carry the physical copy, and it is also available on Hoopla.
I just like imagining this alternate universe where everything is the same, except this Jodorowsky's Dune was actually made and exists in the world, and how everything might be different.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about that in the documentary because, I mean, let's say he was able to actually film that movie as he envisioned it. Wouldn't have gotten a 15-hour movie, but I mean, if we did, it was definitely very, it's totally like out of scope, I think, for the time. Like, just the special effects weren't weren't there. So, I mean, you'd have to think maybe it probably wouldn't be a huge commercial success. And would we have gotten Star Wars in the late 70s? And yeah, the documentary kind of asks that question.
And it's even been spoofed, too, on, most recently, The Simpsons. The Simpsons do an episode where Krusty is filming a Dune-esque movie, and it basically reminded me a little bit of both Jodorowsky's and David Lynch's, because David Lynch was very much, like, thrust upon to do Dune. This is why he doesn't really talk about it at all, and generally will not even discuss it with interviewers because he didn't like it either.
So you mentioned that the movie was kind of your gateway to it. Have you read all of the books? What have you read of the Dune world?
So I did it a little bit differently than most people. Frank Herbert does the original series. I actually started with his son's prequel series. So the first one is called The Butlerian Jihad, and that was really the one that got me into the saga. It was so fast-paced, and it read like an action movie. So you get the beginnings of the Harkonnens, you get the beginnings of the Atreides, of the flight navigators, and everything. So it's really like what happened to Earth and afterwards, and it's all run by, the best way I can describe this, okay, so RoboCop 2, there is a character by the name of Kane, and he is this big giant like mech with his brain. So he's just a robot with a brain, and that's what is happening in the prequel for Dune, is everybody's a sci-mech, and that's what they call them, is sci-mechs, and when there's like an actual human, it's very shocking. So that's how I started reading them. So I read the first 3 that lead up to the House books. So House Carino, House Atreides, House Harkonnen, and then it gets into the actual Dune saga by Frank. Now they have come out with quite a few since they finished the saga of Frank's. They found a bunch of notes that he had left in a safe deposit box at a bank, and they were able to, I guess, finish the saga. It really depends on how you feel about the last couple of books. I'm not entirely sure that's exactly what Frank wanted. It definitely was very much a thing that Brian and Kevin were trying to do. So I definitely feel for all of the George R.R. Martin fans out there, the Sue Grafton fans, where you haven't gotten the last part of the book series from the original author. So it's, I don't want to like set anybody up for failure, but to each their own. And of course, it really depends on your mindset. I tried to go back and read those books that his son and Kevin did, and it was really difficult for me. It really depends on the author. And for stuff like that, we have a database that I love for help with stuff like this called Novelist, where you can find author read-alikes or series read-alikes, and the suggestions you get are vastly different. And I did compare with Dune, and it gave me very different recommendations based off of who was writing the book compared to the series as well.
So have you then read all of the ones that were actually written by Frank Herbert?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. And I even own a first edition of God Emperor of Dune.
Wow, cool.
It's not worth anything, but, you know, I had to.
I just want to jump back to RoboCop 2 for a second. So the brain, is it on top of the body, like where the head would be? Or is it in the middle, like Krang style from Ninja Turtles?
It really depends on the Cymac. So they get to kind of customize what they look like and how terrifying they are. And some of them are monstrous. Like,
so
think
there's a variety.
almost, yeah, think like kaiju size for some of them too.
You know, we talked a little bit about the movies here at the beginning and the documentary. of course, there's been a few adaptations of it. Of course, the '84 film directed by David Lynch, and we got the new series from Denis Villeneuve, and there was some mini-series. I guess, have you watched pretty much anything Dune-related that's been filmed? And do you have a favorite adaptation?
I have watched all of the things, all of them. So I've even gone so far as to find Dune in references for like TV shows, cartoons, stuff like that. So I've even watched all of that stuff. And I kind of love it all. Dune was my first sci-fi heavy book. I don't necessarily classify it myself as a sci-fi book. It just happens to be in a world that is, I mean, we're in the year 10,000. I could very much see this type of stuff potentially happening. Maybe not finding a Dune Arrakis planet with spice, but some of the stuff that happens with the wars, with AI technology that they discuss, and that's actually what a lot of the prequel series is about, is that. And yeah, I love it all. Everything has such a great place in the Dune saga. Some of my favorites, though, are the sci-fi series. It really is a really close adaptation from book to film. The only issue I have with it now is it acts very much like a BBC play. So you have a lot of really overacting Shakespearean actors doing a lot of this stuff. And there are some parts where it works, there are some parts where it doesn't. I think Lynch's version is kind of the best of both worlds, dialogue-wise. We get a lot of the plot, we get a lot of the story, and a lot of the script was taken from the books. And that's the difference between David Lynch's and Villeneuve's, is Villeneuve kept aspects of it, but he isn't copying the book necessarily when it comes to the script writing.
Now, Bryce, you watched Villeneuve's movie in preparation for the podcast. Did you know what was going on? How did you feel about it?
So this is what I would recommend to people. I would recommend kind of doing what I did. I actually started off with Jodorowsky's Dune, the documentary. And they actually do, for the most part, they do kind of describe pretty good kind of what Dune is about. And you also kind of helps you kind of get the magnitude of the series as well, like how much how big, like I'd heard of Dune before and I was aware of it, but I'm not the biggest, outside of Star Wars, like I'm not really the biggest sci-fi fan in the world. So I kind of learned a little bit about the history of it, which I thought was really neat, and about this movie, which never took place. So that was kind of totally in my wheelhouse. So I watched that. Then I started to watch the 1984 David Lynch film, and, sorry, Suzie, I could only get about 20 minutes into it before I tapped out.
Let me guess, you made it to the fight scene and was like, nope, I'm done.
I laughed at it. I got to pretty much the introduction of character Sting plays. Sting is in the movie, by the way. And that's where I kind of tapped out. It was, I kind of looked at the time, realized there was probably another almost 2 hours left. And I was like, I don't think I can do this. So that definitely made me not look forward to watching the 2.5 hour latest Dune movie with like Timothée Chalamet in it, obviously. So, but I knew that one's going to have much better special effects in it and probably look way better. But I do have to say though, the 84 version, as much as I make fun of the special effects, especially during the fight scenes when they're wearing kind of like where they've got like their protective kind of gear on, there's some stuff in there that David Lynch does, like with the sets and everything, that actually look pretty impressive for a movie which I imagine didn't have the biggest budget to begin with. Yeah,
you missed some amazing moments though. if you ever can, if you have the time, you should go back and try and watch it. You missed the best part of the film, and that is Patrick Stewart with a mullet. A lot of the wardrobe has ties to Villeneuve's as well. So Reverend Moham, who is the one that does the Gom Jabbar, is wearing something very similar to the character in the David Lynch film as well. So she's also wearing a really gorgeous beaded frock, and in the new movie, very similar. So that's the one thing I've really enjoyed about Villeneuve's, is he's tried to incorporate all the other Dunes, including Jodorowsky's, into his. And it felt very similar to Dr. Sleep, where the director kind of went with the book as well as the movie by Stanley Kubrick, and then made it his own as well, and kind of tied it all together really nicely.
Yeah, you kind of have to, like, I mean, if you're a casual viewer, like, you're not going to notice that, but I love it when directors do that. You know, they pay homage to the original source, and then also to, like, the fans as well. Like, fans aren't stupid these days. Like, they talk online, and they they shout from the mountaintop about, like, what they love about movies and stuff that they want to see. So for directors to go and be like, kind of, for some people they might just be Easter eggs, and for some people they're obvious, but it's really cool when they add stuff like that. But yeah, I know what you mean with Dr. Sleep. That was a movie that was way better than it probably had any than it should have been, and same with the book too.
And of course, Rose Madder is Lady Jessica.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. But I was going to say, though, and then just with kind of getting that, learning about Jodorowsky's Dune, and then watching the 2021 version, that definitely, I think that really helped me kind of understand more about what was going on. And I know that movie does a really great job of kind of world building a little bit, but if you don't really know what to expect, you might kind of, for some of that movie, be like, I have no idea what's happening right now.
Yeah, and the interesting thing, too, was I'm very curious to know, and of course, Villeneuve won't talk about this because he's still trying to make more of the saga, so he doesn't want to, he doesn't want to slam anybody in the industry that's giving him the funding for this. But I do have to wonder if there was a lot of pressure on him to make it more flashy than it needed to be, just because people weren't going to the theaters yet. And for myself, that was the first movie I saw since the pandemic in an actual theater. And it was a full house. So I wonder if there was a lot of pressure on him to make sure that this is something that was accessible and entertaining for everybody, and knowing full well that the hardcore Dune fans are going to get it.
Yeah, that had to have been tough because, yeah, you're right. Like, I mean, the budget alone on that movie, I didn't have a chance to look it up, but I mean, I imagine it was probably would have been close to, if not like $200 million. Like, this is just an absolute huge epic movie. And yeah, you definitely kind of have to walk that thin line between, you have to make it entertaining for just the average person coming in off the street who hasn't read anything about Dune. And then, of course, you have to appease the hardcore fans, because those are going to be the ones that are probably going to go see it multiple times and buy the Blu-ray and ask for sequels if done right.
Exactly. And it's so tough to do that, and also to make it your own and not rely too heavily on what had been done previously, especially when there's so many people that, take it or leave it, they might not love David Lynch's version, so they don't want to go into a new Dune movie where that's going to be the same thing.
David Lynch's version, that has Kyle MacLachlan in it, right?
Yes, Kyle MacLachlan.
I enjoy him.
Oh, he is delightful in this. And the more I watch the David Lynch version, the more I just love Kyle MacLachlan in that role, because it is so... That is not who I would ever picture for Paul Atreides. And in the books, Paul is incredible incredibly young. We're talking like I think he's either 7 or 9 years old when we first meet him. So he is an incredibly young person in the books, and that's definitely different with Kyle MacLachlan, who very much looks like he's in his late 20s, early 30s at that point. Sorry, Kyle, if you were younger than that. You still look the same. So, like, you still look like you're in your 30s.
So the age of Paul in the David Lynch movie is one difference, but are there any major differences between the books and the films?
Some of the major things are, when you're dealing with movies, you tend to rely on your actors to portray the inner dialogue that's going on, as opposed to actually having the dialogue happen, which, for David Lynch's version, that inner dialogue was very much being acted upon. And so it has this really weird feel to it, where you can, even if the CG or the VFX were better, you could still tell it was clearly made in the 80s, because that's how sci-fi really was, unless it was a brand new idea like Star Wars, even though that is an amalgamation of many different fan service things. But yeah, the dialogue is completely different. There's so much more going on in the books than we've ever seen in any of the versions. I think the sci-fi miniseries is probably the closest we'll get to seeing the book to film, but that was a miniseries, and with movies, you only get 3 max 4 hours to tell your story, and you have to condense a whole book into that. I'm not surprised he is doing this in 2 parts, and the more I think about it, I am curious to see if we will get a 3rd part to this as well, because I don't know how he's going to fit everything that still needs to be told in the next movie. And with the books as well, there are some underlying themes that you'll read. But the other thing too, and I hope that we get this in the next one, is a little bit more information on the Fremen. So we didn't really learn anything about the Fremen unless you borrowed the DVD that we carry and watch the special features on the houses. That gives you a really good description of what is going on, but it wasn't ever in the movie itself. So the special features are pretty instrumental with the Villeneuve movies if you want to get more information as to what's going on. And of course, VFX over the years, cinematography, everything has changed so significantly that now is the best time to probably do sci-fi books to film or to TV shows. We have better technology now, but it is very different when you're looking at something that is a very visual representation compared to reading about it.
Obviously, you've read all the Frank Herbert books, seen pretty much anything that's been filmed that has to do with Dune. I guess, do you have any favorite moments or characters that in the whole series that you love the most?
Yes, I'm very much looking forward to seeing Alia, who is the daughter of Duke Leto and Jessica. We find out about the pregnancy in part 1 of Dune, and she has an incredibly important role in the saga itself, not even just the movies, but in the saga in general. She is a huge, oh my gosh, I could do a podcast just about Alia at this point. In the David Lynch film, I didn't realize until a couple of years ago, because I'm part of a David Lynch group on Facebook, the Lynchland Gang, which is wonderful, and I love everybody. And they pointed out that's Alicia Witt as Alia in the Dune movie, and I couldn't believe it. I didn't even recognize her, but upon rewatching it, I'm like, oh yeah, that's absolutely her. So I'm really curious to see if we are going to see Alia at some point. And then some of the weirder, more obscure Dune references. There's one, I actually bought this series because I wanted it just for this one episode. It is a cartoon from the late 90s, maybe early 2000s, called The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. And Billy is kind of this, super rambunctious, borderline annoying brother, and Mandy is very much a Gaz character, sort of like the Invader Zim character, where she's just very speaks in monotone, doesn't like anything, is so annoyed with Billy. And she is the God Emperor, and Billy is Duncan Idaho. Now, I don't want to spoil anything, so that's where I'm going to end that, because unless you've read the book, you'll kind of know what's going to happen to the Billy character repeatedly. So it was hilarious. It's like a 15-minute cartoon, and it just makes me laugh every single time I watch it.
Duncan, Idaho, by the way, having no context whatsoever, is a fantastic name.
Yeah, if I had to create if you were like a celebrity and you had to like check into a hotel under a different name, Duncan, Idaho would be a pretty good one to use. But that also kind of made me laugh though in watching this and knowing that the movie's set in the year 10,192 or whatever. And we have Duncans, we got Jessicas, we got Pauls. I would think just with the trend in names happening, we'd see a lot of if you're in the year 10,000, there'd be a lot of Braxtons or Caleb's or something like that.
Bryce, did you have any favorite characters from the Villeneuve version?
I don't know if I did. You know what? I have to say that I don't want to say I'm not the biggest Timothée Chalamet fan. I think he's a fine actor, but when I think of Timothée Chalamet action hero, he is not kind of at the top of the list. Obviously this is coming from a guy who grew up, as I just stated a little while ago, on Schwarzenegger and Van Damme movies. So to have kind of scrawny Timothée Chalamet be this, kind of this prince who's like the chosen one and has got to save the day. I wasn't on paper buying it, but by the time the movie ended, I was fully invested in Paul Atreides. I'm like the other characters. I'm ready to follow him into battle.
Now, the other thing that I do want to mention for people that might be wanting to read these books, they are incredibly graphic. And I do mean this very seriously. The Harkonnen are absolute monsters. They are everything that is wrong with humans is localized in Baron Harkonnen. And just a heads up, I won't even discuss some of the stuff he does, but it is truly nightmarish. And the way he's represented in the books is something that Villeneuve didn't do. And I'm curious to know why, because Baron Harkonnen is a walking disease. He is covered in sores. He bathes in oil. He lives on a planet that just exudes exhaust and toxic waste, and he bathes in that stuff. And they didn't really do too much of that in the Villeneuve movie. So when you're reading the books, just go in knowing that the Harkonnen are... Baron Harkonnen is probably one of the worst villains ever written. I don't think anybody can compare to him.
I don't know if I'll ever read the book, but based on your description, you kind of sold me in wanting to pick this up and actually read it. So you have me curious and interested.
Okay.
I will say that.
Okay, so maybe to add to this, in one of the moments where we first meet the Cymex and the Butlerian Jihad and Vor, which is a character whose last name I won't mention just yet, one of the Cymex is using human blood to paint. So the books are incredibly graphic and not for the faint of heart.
We haven't talked about sandworms yet. As someone who knows nothing about Dune, don't they have sandworms?
They do! Shai-Hulud. Shai-Hulud are our sandworms in this book and movie, and they are incredibly important not only to the ecosystem of Arrakis, but to the Fremen themselves. And without those sandworms, nothing would work in that universe whatsoever. You would not have time travel. You would not have the ability to... Okay, so I use time travel kind of loosely because it's a wormhole technology type thing, which kind of is time travel. I mean, none of this is really real, but...
Suzie was just reacting, I think, to my reaction, which was, hang on, there's time travel in these books?
Yeah, much like Doctor Who, it can get pretty timey-wimey, wibbly-wobbly, as most good sci-fi does to us. But yeah, it's the sandworms, and this is really the first time we've gotten to see the best versions of the sandworms for VFX. And the new ones, they look real. They look like they could be living, breathing organisms. And it's phenomenal. Like, the first time that we see one up close with Paul and his mother when they're in the desert, I almost broke down in tears in the theater because it was the first time I've seen one done so well that wasn't a puppet, that wasn't like a little miniature that they were moving around and making, and was all janky, much like the David Lynch ones. It was what I had envisioned when I was reading the books, so kudos to the VFX.
Well, I, for one, am interested in learning more about the sandworms, and I have a feeling that we're going to see more of them in part 2. I guess, obviously, somebody who's read the book, and it sounds like the first movie was kind of... it sounds like maybe the first 2 movies here are going to be split... basically going to be the first book. So I guess, what are you most interested in seeing here in part 2?
I am so looking forward to seeing Sietch Tabr. I am very much looking forward to what Jessica is going to be put through, what Paul is going to be put through, to see what the Fremen deal with when there is a fight to the death for somebody's water, and what is going to happen to Paul after what happened between him and Jameis in the first movie. So I'm curious to see if they'll do that. And of course, Christopher Walken, hands down, the moment they announced him as the Emperor, I screamed so loud. I cannot wait for the moments where we get to see him and Baron Harkonnen together. For those of you that don't know, Walken was actually in something very Dune related that might have gone unheard of by some. He was in a music video by Fatboy Slim featuring Bootsy Collins called Weapon of Choice. And if you listen to the lyrics, there's not too many, it actually says, if you walk without rhythm, you won't attract the worm. And that's how you have to walk when you're in the desert, because they use the thumpers, and that rhythmic noise is what draws the sandworms in. So Fremen and Desert Power, you walk without rhythm to confuse the worms.
I remember the walking thing when Paul was like training to go to the planet. He learns that before he gets there about can't just walk in a regular motion. So I'm looking forward to watching it as well and learning more all about the world of Dune.
Yeah, I know we've seen it in the trailers, and there is an epic battle that will be happening. It's going to be amazing. And again, I am so curious to know where he's going to leave this. I know his plan is to continue as long as they'll let him to continue this as well. I believe HBO is doing a TV show which has been renamed. It was supposed to be about I think, the Sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit. But now I think they're kind of changing it, so I don't know what that plan is, if they're going to continue with the books and do that, or if they're going to give Villeneuve more movies to do with this.
Wow, so it sounds like it could go in a lot of different directions, which is something I don't think I would have said of something that has such, extensive source material. Like, it feels like, you might be hemmed in by that, but actually kind of what he decides to focus on could really, really go in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and there's so much going on in the second part of this, where I think in the Lynch version, he really did a great job of explaining a lot of the core elements of what was going on. And Villeneuve, in the first one, there's not much dialogue going on. It's very VFX heavy, doing the setups of the characters, of the houses. We didn't even meet Fade in the first one. He's going to be in the second one. We don't meet Irulan, who is the Padishah Emperor's daughter. We haven't met any of these characters yet. So there's going to be a lot of dialogue in this one, but the happy reward for all of us that love our action films is the last hour of that film is going to be insane.
Before we get to our roundtable questions, Bryce, can you let our listeners know what's coming up on our special bonus episode, which will be released next week on Friday, March 1st?
Yeah, March is almost here, so that means only one thing. Yes, it's time for the 6th annual Overdue Finds March Madness Tournament. Insert air horn noise if we had one. Last year, your votes determined that Darth Vader was the best villain, but tune into our bonus episode to find out what this year's theme is going to be, and as we preview all the matchups.
We've been working on it behind the scenes. It is exciting. I can't wait. And I just love this tournament because I look at the brackets, I look at the breakdown, and I go, oh, well, it's so obvious what's going to happen here. And then everyone else has one completely different. So,
all right, quick roundtable question time. We love our BuzzFeed quizzes here on Overdue Finds, so I sent a link out to one, and we'll include that in our show notes. The quiz is called, Which Dune Character Are You Most Like? So I sent the link out. Suzie, what character did you get?
I got Paul Atreides, which was a little surprising. I feel like this one was very much for the Villeneuve one, not the book or previous adaptations. This was very much for Villeneuve. I was a little surprised. I'm not going to lie. I think it's because the home planet of Caladan it is Western Canada. Yeah. And that's my favorite part, is it is water everywhere. It's gorgeous. It has mountains. It's everything I love about nature. So I have a feeling that's why I got Paul.
Makes sense. Yeah, the picture they use in there totally looks like British Columbia. So, Caroline, who did you get?
I also got Paul with the description, people feel like they can connect to you even if they don't know you very well. Sometimes you feel like you're under a lot of pressure, but you have to give yourself more credit. You're a smart and capable friend. And I think it's because the first couple choices in the quiz were just we were choosing sand dunes, pictures of dunes. And I was like, oh, this is terrifying to me. So as soon as there were options with water in them, I just started choosing water. I'm like, I'm not going to get stuck away from a source of water. So I think that may have skewed the results.
So it's kind of funny is I also got Paul Atreides on mine. So clearly BuzzFeed needs to do a better job with kind of setting maybe those up, maybe give us some different options to go with. I was kind of hoping for somebody, really cool like Duncan, Idaho, but did not get that, unfortunately, but that's okay. It was still a fun quiz to take, and we'll share the link to that in our show notes.
If anyone knows of a really great Dune character quiz, email us, podcast@epl.ca. Bryce really wants to be Duncan, Idaho.
I do, yeah. Let's skew those results a little bit. All right, so last question. This could be anything. I was going to have this just be sci-fi, but it can be anything you want. Which book would you like to see turned into a movie? It can be anything. Suzie?
Oh, keeping with Dune and the fact that I'm actually getting more and more obsessed with it, the closer, we have a week to go. I have a countdown. Set. I am ready. Cannot wait. Of course, I wasn't lucky enough to get IMAX tickets, so I still have to wait to get that. But I want God Emperor of Dune so badly. We've never gotten it, and we've just been teased consistently over the years of the setup for it. They did it with the sci-fi movie. We got a little glimpse of what was going to happen, and then they didn't continue the saga. So I just want to see the God Emperor of Dune. That's all I want. That's all I want.
So which book number is that, in this book series?
That is the fourth book in the series. So I would be happy if we even made it to the third book in the series, but I want the fourth book so badly. It is one of those books in a saga that is so jarring when you read it the first time, or at least it was for me because of the timeline jump that happens.
Caroline, how about you? What would you like to see adapted into a movie?
The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. Book that's come up a few times on the podcast. I'd like to see it. I think you could do a lot of really interesting things. She talks in the book about how when she was filming Crossroads, she disappeared into the role. So I think that you could have, maybe she plays herself and maybe someone else. It's a meta, different layers. I don't know. There's a lot that you could do with it. And I would love to see the right director have a chance to make something out of it. So, yeah. What about you, Bryce? What do you think?
Well, I recently saw the movie The Iron Claw, about the real-life story about the Von Erich wrestling family. It got me thinking, we need another good movie about professional wrestlers, so let's adapt Rowdy Roddy Piper's life story from his book called Rowdy, the Roddy Piper Story, which, by the way, was actually written by his kids. So I'd love to get a biopic of the life of the late, great wrestling villain Rowdy Roddy Piper, who's originally from Saskatoon and grew up on the mean streets there, and small guy getting into the wrestling business and probably shouldn't have made it, but did, and ended up being in some awesome movies like They Live. So, I'd love to see a movie about the life of Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Suzie. This has been so interesting to hear all of the Dune world information. I know I've learned a lot. Is there anything coming up at EPL or here at White Mud Crossing that you would like to let listeners know about?
Yes, we actually have quite a few things going on at our location. So Sundays, we show family films at the library. And fun fact, this actually used to be the Cineplex Odeon before it moved to South Edmonton Commons. So this is my movie theater when I was growing up. So the fact that we are showing movies here makes me so happy. And every third Thursday of the month, we show movies, given that it's still February, love is in the air, that you can bring a date to. So we are going to be showing the Ghostbusters. We just finished Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is a classic. So the next one up is Ghostbusters. And then we also have a special event going on. So this Saturday from 2 to 3 p.m., we are going to be hosting Wondrous Webs. And it is a tie-in event with our family book club title, Charlotte's Web.
So that is February 24th. So if you didn't make it out to that one at White Mud Crossing, don't worry. The Family Book Club program is running all year long, so there will be lots of different classes that you can experience at branches across the city, and we'll have a link to that in our list of items. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Make sure that you've subscribed to the show so that you get all of our new episodes, including next week's bonus episode. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and most importantly, tell a friend about the show.
Yeah, and don't forget that we'll have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. You can always email us at podcast@epl.ca. Both Caroline and myself get those emails, and we love to hear from listeners. You can also share your thoughts about the show with us on Twitter, or X as the cool kids call it, at epl.ca, and by using the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.